Home isn't just a place, it's a feeling. Whether you're at home, your business, or online, ADT helps keep you safe. With security systems, home automation, alarms, and surveillance, so you can feel at home wherever you are. Go to ADT.com to get that feeling. ADT, home, safe home.
This is the Best of Mike and Mike podcast. Subscribe now by going to the Listen tab in the ESPN app.
The Best of Mike and Mike.
Back and better than ever, Mike and Mike presented by Progressive Insurance. Our guests on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Another day, another issue away from the wins and losses of it all, dominating the headlines in our little world of sports. And this time, it's the feds going after corruption in college basketball in a big way. And among those right in the middle of it, a Hall of Famer who many feel will not survive this scandal with his job. Golic, what a complete mess we saw play out yesterday.
Well, we wanted to get back to sports. Here we are.
Here we are. Back to sports. Stick to sports, guys.
You wonder when you're one of these assistant coaches and or financial services people or someone associated with Adidas, when you hear these charges, does your head start to spin? And I'll tell you where it stops. When you hear you're charged with bribery, when do you understand it all? Bribery, conspiracy, solicitation of bribes, honest services fraud conspiracy, honest service fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and travel act conspiracy. You'd be going, what the hell does all that mean? And then the U.S. Department of Justice said each of the coaches faces a maximum sentences of 80 years in prison. That they understand.
Yeah,
They're going, okay, you mean all that, what you just read there, can get us 80 years in the prison? I doubt it's going to get him 80 years, but it could certainly give him some time and could start a whole trickle-down effect of, okay, I'm going to start singing now to get less, and who else is involved? Holy smokes, what a mess we have going on here. And when you break it all down, which we'll try to do, it really turns out to be two separate things we're going to be talking about.
Correct. There was one that I understood immediately, and there was one I need a little help with, and thankfully I have a lawyer on speed dial.
I was happy to help you when you called me yesterday, except you just called me looking for Jay Bilas' number.
I call you when my son turns an ankle. I call Jay Bilas when I need legal assistance.
Exactly.
Because there was something in this that I didn't understand why it was a crime. I understand. We'll get into it. Let's start with off the top here. Let's dive into some of the other issues here, and then we will get into the NCAA stuff in detail. Let's start with Dwayne Wade, who plans to sign with the Cavaliers as soon as he clears waivers today. So he and LeBron, they're putting the group back together again, only this time D. Wade's going to be coming off the bench.
Yeah, he is. And these two have shared the most, or I should say D. Wade has shared the most court time with James, over 2,700 minutes in the postseason. So basically it's equivalent to more than 76 playoff games. So they certainly know one another. You'll find a lot of fun little numbers associated with that. But Dwayne Wade is coming off his worst year as far as minutes per game, field goal percentage, points per game on cuts, all different, efficient, effective field goal percentage, all these wacky numbers out there. It wasn't one of his better years, but, Father Time is obviously catching up with him. That's why in this scenario, now we'll see about how much he plays before Isaiah Thomas gets back with the hip, and then after Isaiah Thomas gets back and they get into that rotation, which they're only going to care about in May and June, right, of just what he's going to produce off the bench, because we can talk about resting players all you want, and whether they get ripped by it or whether they need it, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is the resting that the Cavaliers are concerned about is when LeBron needs a 2-minute break, feel free to not give up 9-point leads. Be better when LeBron needs an actual blow during the game to where you can still function, and Dwayne Wade could be a big part of that.
Correct. Wade could, and they've got Derrick Rose who can get you a bucket every now and again, and obviously Isaiah can get you a bucket. So I think that the Wade acquisition for Cleveland is going to be huge. Yeah. He is a player, and you read through all those numbers in Chicago last year. The things that he was expected to do in Chicago last year, he can't do anymore. Right. But he doesn't have to do those things in Cleveland. He just has to do what you're talking about. And there will be games they will win in the postseason, I'm predicting right now, where you will say the best player on the court was Dwayne Wade. Now, that doesn't mean there'll be 9 of them. Right. But there might be 2 of them. And maybe one of them will be against Golden State.
Would you say the only 2 constants are going to be LeBron and Kevin Love? Or would you even say there's going to be one?
Well, let's see how Isaiah comes back. When you say constant.
Constant's like, because Isaiah's probably not going to start the season.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Constance from beginning to end. You're putting Tristan Thompson in that?
Yeah,
or you're saying just pieces?
How about Zizic?
You want to hit the button?
Okay. Let's move on to the next.
Off the top.
Neither team with a chance to lock down a playoff spot in baseball did yesterday. The Cubs still need to win. The Twins' magic number is still 1.
Yeah, Tuesday loss ended the Cubs' winning streak against the Cardinals at 6 games, so they're still looking to lock things up in Minnesota. While they won, their magic number is down to 1, so it's either a win by them or a loss by the Angels. It's just a matter of time, but it's still amazing. Their record is 83-74. And last year they were 59-103, and they've been doing it as of late with the long ball. A couple of home runs yesterday gave the Twins 82 home runs since August 8th. That's most in the majors, and they're 29-18 over that span, tied for the 5th best record in all of baseball.
Yeah, that's a remarkable turnaround for that team. I'm just disappointed because I was hoping for that unprecedented 7-way tie for the second wild card in the American League. I just wanted to see how they'd work it out.
Yeah.
Like, I've never seen a person's head actually explode. Mm-hmm. And we've seen in sports lately a lot of commissioners with a lot on their plate. I mean, Roger Goodell obviously has a lot to deal with right now, and we've seen them all go through a lot of things. But if there was a 7-way tie for the second American League wildcard spot, I think Rob Manfred's head might actually have exploded.
He would call one of his people and say, "Get me the algorithm guy."
Off the top.
I just wanted to see what they would do.
Yeah.
Okay, have we seen this before? A fan got thrown out of the ballpark yesterday in a game between the Yankees and the Rays because the fan sitting behind home plate was yelling at the location of pitches.
Gary Sanchez was up, so is a Yankee fan, so he was trying to tip Gary Sanchez of location by how the catcher was setting up. So he was basically, I think he was doing it in Spanish, was he not?
Correct.
Rambo? Yeah, and he did it a couple of times, and the refs tossed him. Joe Girardi said he had heard it the first time, didn't think much of it, then heard it again and was like, okay, where's that coming from? And the umps heard it as well. And they ended up throwing out the fan, of which Joe Girardi said that is absolutely the correct thing to do when a fan is trying to give away. Look, my thought is you pay money for those tickets, man. You can get away with it. Go ahead, man.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Like, should you be able to throw out a fan for just yelling out something he can see?
He can see. Everybody can see where the catcher is setting up, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, in theory, if you're sitting
depending
in a spot
where your seat is, if you can see at the end of it.
But not everyone's close enough that if they yelled it out, the batter could hear it. But in that case, I don't know. Did they move him to another area?
I think they
says they were removed from the park.
I want to know. Listen, we always say look at the back of the ticket. Does it say in there anywhere? I mean, you can get thrown out for certain things. What category does that fall into?
Now, I understand that if you didn't make that against the rule, that every team would just position somebody there to yell that stuff out.
Yeah.
So you can't have it happen. But can you throw a guy out of a ball? If this person legitimately bought his own ticket and was just sitting there and could see it, that doesn't. The guys in the room are yelling back to me. It's like interfering with a ball in play. I don't think it's like interfering with a ball in play. I'm just yelling out something I can see.
Yeah.
Like if I yell out the shift is on, granted the batter can see the shift is on, but I'm just yelling out what I'm seeing on the field.
Would a fan get tossed? I'm thinking in a football game, there's that one commercial. Would a fan get tossed? Mike's 54. 54 is the Mike. 54 is the Mike.
Exactly.
They're going in and throwing that guy out.
No fan shall yell Omaha from the stands at a football game.
I get why I do get why they do it. I do too. But do you throw him out or you say, go put him in a seat with a horrible sight line?
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I hope they moved him to a bad seat. I don't think that he should have been thrown out of the ballpark for that, or at least get him a beer. All right, and that brings us back then to the federal prosecutors charging 4 assistant coaches with fraud and corruption. That's enough of the fun. Mike and Off the Top, presented by Progressive Insurance, where they will compare rates for you so you get the best deal, even if it's not with Progressive, saving you time and money. Now that's Progressive. Call or click today. So there are really 2 separate pieces. For those of you who may have seen some headlines and seen some stuff flash by you on social media and maybe not delved deeply into this, Mike, I'll let you take the floor. But there are really 2 separate pieces of this. Right. Let's start with the piece relating to the assistant coaches, because that part of it really is despicable, and it's very easy to understand why it's a crime.
Okay, so basically you have 4 assistant coaches at this point who are named in documents. Auburn assistant Chuck Person. That's a
terrific NBA player
people
for a long time. Yep.
Oklahoma State assistant Lamont Evans, Arizona assistant Emmanuel Richardson, and USC assistant Tony Bland, all have been somehow relieved, whether with pay, without, or with pay. Basically what they did, I mean, tale as old as time. I mean, with this one is basically trying to steer kids to certain either schools or agents or financial investors and getting paid for it. Basically, hey, you give me a lot of money and I'll get this kid to you. I mean, this has been I want to put it in the simplest terms as it can. Assistant coaches get handed a bunch of money to steer really good players, to even tailors. Even tailors.
Yeah, guys who make their suits.
Guys who make their suits, yeah. Tailors, financial advisors, agents.
And without those players these guys are taking money without those players knowing.
Right.
And thus, they're not necessarily steering them in a direction that they believe is in the best interest of these young men.
Right.
But they're just taking money to steer them in certain directions. I mean,
again,
that's really horrible.
This has been going on forever. So let's when you read this, don't go, oh my God, this is not new. They got caught. That's a part of it, and they may not be the only ones getting caught. As basically the FBI has said is, hey, gang, we got your playbook. Make it easy on yourself. We'll give you a number. Call us. Turn yourself in because we're going to eventually find more of you that are doing this. So we'll see where it goes, but that's it in a nutshell. Assistant coaches put money in their pocket to steer players toward agents, financial advisors, tailors, anything like that. That's one side.
I will admit something to you right now. You're saying this is a tale as old as time, and I believe you. You're much more plugged into this. This is stuff I did not really know
absolutely.
about.
Yeah.
That assistant coaches who are a guy like Chuck Person, how much money did he make in the NBA?
Yeah.
That he's taking, tens of thousands of dollars to steer a 19-year-old kid. And let's not get into the whole should they pay these kids or not argument today. But we all know they're not getting paid.
No, they're not. Right.
And we all know that whatever that money they may be getting funneled under the table, and we're going to get to that part of this in a minute here, it pales in comparison to the money that Chuck Person made playing in the NBA. And he's taking tens of thousands of dollars to steer this kid towards an agent. He made $23 million playing in the NBA in his career. That's again, I should preface all this by saying, if true, these are at this point, he's just accused of this stuff, but that's really despicable. Because these kids trust these guys, right?
And there you go. Let me tell you about recruiting. Recruiting isn't about the head coach eventually will sign off on an assistant coach saying you can offer this guy a scholarship. The relationship built is with the assistant coach. The assistant coaches are the ones that go on the road. Now, the head coach will go on the road, but a lot of times they're going to the 5 stars. But a lot of these guys can be 5 stars. Right. And the head coaches may have met with these guys at some point, but it's more, I'm meeting the top dog. Hey, we really want you, this and that. The over and over meetings and a relationship and whatever's allowed via text or phone call or visits, the assistant coaches do most of that. So the player, just as you said, builds that trust. So a lot of times for players who truly are not sure where they want to go and they're looking at everything, a lot of it can be about the trust you have with the assistant coach that keeps calling you or texting you or you're meeting with. How comfortable are you with him? It just goes on and on. It's like a player when I was going into the NFL and you start dealing with different agents. Who do you feel comfortable with when you go through that process? And there are agents that will give you money and all. It's obviously another thing as well. So that's the comfort factor. And when you get comfortable with someone and they say they maybe want to come to your school, then it's not only come to your school, it's like, hey, things are going to go really well for you. I got a guy. Listen, there's a lot of sharks out there. I got a guy that's going to handle your money the right way.
Right.
I got a guy that's going to deck you out. When you're going to sitting there for the draft and after, he's going to deck you out. So you get that trust built up, and then they want to come to your school, and then you can steer them as well from there. Or if you say, if you come to my school, I can steer you to these places, which I know is the best thing for you. Believe me. The best thing for you as they put money in their pocket. That's how this goes.
That's the really despicable piece of this. Again, the other part of it, which we'll get to in a minute, which is what I would consider the tale as old as time, which is funneling money to a kid to come to a school. You could almost argue that's a victimless crime. I mean, it is breaking the NCAA rules. That was why I called Bilas yesterday. I wanted to figure out what part of that is actually a crime, and we will explain that in a moment.
That's the second part of it.
But this part of it, this is all being done without the kids knowing it.
Right.
And I'll keep calling them kids. I know some people get offended when you call them kids. When you get to be my age, those kids are kids, right? And my daughter just turned 17. These guys are 18 that we're talking about. So they are absolutely kids to me. And this is the one person in as you said, an ocean full of sharks they're supposed to be able to trust, who's supposed to be looking out for them. And so for those guys to be taking money on the side, I will admit, I did not know that was a tale as old as time. And that is the one that just personally, it bothers me much more than the other piece of this. As far as how significant it is from the standpoint of a federal crime, Jay Bilas was on yesterday talking about that.
For everyone charged in this federal investigation, they could be looking at up to 20 years in prison. So that is certainly a lot more difficult to deal with than a postseason ban or a show cause penalty. And having the weight of the federal government behind these allegations and charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, in two separate schemes, one to funnel players to specific institutions, and then to the shoe company itself, and then also to funnel players to investment advisors and agents. This is pretty pervasive.
So this next one we're going to talk about, I think, was going to make everybody's ears perk up a little more because it's going to involve a school we know and a person we know that's been in the headlines.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most famous coaches, I guess, in college basketball history, and that's Rick Pitino, who is directly in the middle of this and who everyone I spoke to yesterday and everyone I read yesterday said that if this turns out to be true, that they can't envision a scenario where he keeps his job.
No.
So that's what's at stake here. Let's make it clear. We're talking about the career of a guy who has come through a lot of scandals. I mean, including one of the highest profile and sort of unique scandals that we've ever seen with the strippers and everything else. The second piece of this story is the tale as old as time, as I know it, which is there is an allegation, and the word Louisville is never actually used in the complaint, but they couldn't steer you to it any more clearly than they did, and Louisville has acknowledged that it has received notice that it is the school in question.
Let's explain that with this one.
Basically, the accusation is that an assistant coach had the people, this guy at Adidas, a very high-ranking executive at Adidas, who has been charged by the feds, funnel $100,000 in 4 separate payments to the family of this 5-star recruit who signed with Louisville really late and under unusual circumstances in the process. His name is Brian Bowen, and he wound up signing at Louisville in early June. And so if all of this is true and proven, and in some of the conversations I had yesterday, it was suggested there's no way the feds take the steps they take yesterday if they don't have wiretaps and all kinds of things.
Oh, they had taps.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So let's just play out this timeline.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Because that's where it gets really...
June 11th is when the NCAA came down with the sanctions against Louisville for the whole Andrew McGee and the escorts and the
stripper scandal,
and the sex thing that Rick Pitino was appalled at and doesn't understand how that happened.
And has been suspended 7 games for, by the way.
It was June 11th. Also, what happened over the summer? Louisville and Adidas announced a 10-year, $160 million extension of their sponsorship deal. That was over the summer as well. Mm-hmm. So June 11th, the discipline came down on Louisville. July 27th, so 6 weeks later? 6 weeks later, there's an assistant coach in Vegas with a rep from Adidas talking about funneling thousands of dollars to potential high school recruits. And there was wiretapping there, to which the assistant coach was caught saying, "We got to be very low key." I mean, so let's be honest. There's 3 ways of this, unless I'm missing something, okay?
Go ahead.
As far as Rick Pitino, because that's what it could come back to, right?
Who did? You want me to read his statement quickly?
Go ahead.
Just so you have it?
Yes.
Here's what Pitino said, quote, "These allegations come as a complete shock to me. If true, I agree with the U.S. Attorney's Office that these third-party schemes initiated by a few bad actors operated to commit a fraud on the impacted universities and their basketball programs, including the University of Louisville. Our fans and supporters deserve better, and I'm committed to taking whatever steps are needed to ensure those responsible are held accountable."
So what you have is one of his assistant coaches bringing in strippers and stripping and having sex with recruits.
Andre McGee, yeah.
And then you have another assistant coach who's out in Vegas saying we got to keep this, on the down low. We were trying to get that, on the DL,
right?
And this money getting funneled to the player that commits to Louisville. And both times you have Rick Pitino saying, "Oh, man, this is stunning. I have no idea this is going on, and we're going to get to the bottom of it." So there's. And as I said, if you can think of another way, let me know. There's either I don't believe a word he's saying, side of it. There's, I believe him. Listen, you can't monitor everything. So a few bad actors, like he said, we move on. Why should he lose his job? And then there's in the middle of, okay, if you slightly want to give him the benefit of the doubt that he truly knew nothing, then should he be fired for not knowing what the hell's going on in his program?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think that's what's going to cost him, is saying, okay, Rick, you can scream to the high heavens that you didn't know anything that was going on, but these aren't a couple of minor things that just went on by people that are a part of your basketball operation. And we are about to get bludgeoned over the head yet again for that.
Yeah, and actually, what you're talking about, I agree with you, are the three options in the court of public opinion.
Yes.
In the NCAA, it's actually much clearer than that. They now have this coach's responsibility.
Right.
What's the exact wording of
it?
Well,
show cause,
the show cause penalty is what Andre McGee has.
Failure to monitor. Now, in the other case, he was not charged with failure to monitor the program.
Right.
He was charged with failure to monitor Andrew McGee,
right,
his assistant. So is he going to get another failure to monitor this coach, or is it going to be failure to monitor the program?
They somewhere along the way, Jay was telling me this yesterday, they changed recently the wording on that rule so that essentially the coach is ultimately responsible for all of this stuff.
Right.
He can't argue, I didn't know.
Right.
It's his job to know. They've clarified that it's his job to know.
We may need to get Jay.
He's going down. I mean, the bottom line of it is that unless there is some huge mistake here, unless somehow Louisville can figure out a way, or he can figure out a way, or if someone can figure out a way that this didn't actually happen the way it sounds like it happened, and again, Mike read you the wiretaps and everything else, it seems impossible to imagine the NCAA will not go after Pitino, and considering the fact that he is already under the trouble that he's in and that he is already suspended for multiple games this coming season and all of the history, I haven't heard one person nor read one person who believes that unless there's some huge mistake involved here, that Pitino will keep his job.
Again, he's the big name in all this, but just to be factually correct, again, there were two universities sponsored by the Athletic Shoe Company. Court papers didn't name the schools, but contained enough details to identify them as Louisville and Miami. So just so we mentioned both schools, but most of the talk is going to be about Louisville because it's going to be about Rick Pitino and how this is probably going to be the end of him.
The best of Mike and Mike.
All right, we're Mike and Mike. We roll along, and now we are Mike Cubed, as Mike Golic Jr. has joined us here in our studio with thoughts on this. And of the three of us, two of us were at one time scholarship athletes.
Yes.
One of us recently. So we can have a little more recent perspective on the way things are working. How are you, Mikey?
I'm good. Unfortunately, I missed my $100,000 handshake during the course of my time as a scholarship athlete.
Yeah, and I had said there was – now, you were at a time where you guys all committed early, and it was done, For when I was getting recruited, we actually committed like after our senior years of high school, which seems absurd right now. And I had said it more than a few times. I got offered money by a couple of schools, a monthly stipend that they would give. But I at that point I wanted to go to Notre Dame. I committed to Notre Dame Thanksgiving in November after my senior year was just ending. But yeah, so I mean that happened. That was by schools, coaches, that.
Sure.
Kind of thing.
So that's a tale as old as time, and we know about boosters, and we now know
right.
about, particularly in basketball, where the shoe companies become involved in that. That's not much of a surprise, and so we will get to that on the Louisville piece of this in a second. But the part, Mikey, that I really didn't know about that much, that your dad was explaining to me, is also a tale as old as time, is this idea of assistant coaches who are lining their own pockets to steer kids in directions without those players knowing it that may not be in their players' best interest, towards financial advisors, towards agents who by definition are shady because they are engaged in something that is 100% outside the rules, and to guys who might make them suits and all of that to a slightly lesser degree. To what degree were you aware of that? To what degree does this surprise you, and what is your overall thought on it?
The idea of coaches doing is a little more surprising because you always hear about the idea of runners when you're in college, like the guys that are the sort of third-party candidates designed by agents, by advisors, by all those same groups to just draw you towards that eventual person to be, whatever that role tends to be for you going forward. The idea of a coaching going forward is a little more nefarious just because all of this to that point undermines everything the NCAA claims to stand for. Again, like constantly showing what a sham the whole amateur model is. amateurism model is when you're supposed to go out there and protect and serve the student athletes and preserve their safety, and yet you're using the person with the power in this relationship with a relationship where kids are supposed to trust these guys. Especially, we always talk about this with assistants who you tend to be a little closer with than the head coaches in a lot of instances. So to take advantage of that relationship, and not like the situation with Adidas and all this where everyone's got a pretty clear understanding, like you're doing this to sign with a brand you can trust after all of this. The guy who popped all of this off, the guy who sang originally to the FBI, got indicted by the SEC for, fraudulently practicing as a financial advisor for, investing money in places that these guys weren't involved in. And we see this time and time again with athletes. So you're actually almost actively setting these kids up in a lot of cases to be taken advantage of later in life. So,
but think about the layout and think about if you are going to choose, if you're a manager, financial advisor, or whatever, and you're going to choose to go down a bad road, right? As Mike said, there were runners that would be on campus. So you start to think about it. Would you have better luck with a runner who the player doesn't know, as well, offering a bag of money or whatever it is? Or would you say, man, I bet there's assistant coaches out there that wouldn't mind making a few extra bucks. Now, you got to have everybody on the same page. They're going to have a way better chance of getting you that player than a runner is. So I think that's out but you got to have obviously everybody involved. The assistant coach has to be on it knowing full well that can come back and bite them like we're seeing right now. But if you think about, if everybody chooses to go down the dark road, this is a make sense road if you're going to do it illegally. Who has the players' trust the most? Mike knows it. I know it. Any player knows it. Without question, it's the assistant coach who you're with all the time. Now you just have to find that assistant coach who wants to line his pocket a little bit.
And that's why this is, to me, so high on the despicable scale. I mean, forgetting the criminal justice scale, I understand each of these will come with their own penalties, and the law can recognize them any way they want. But here is the ultimate, Mikey, and I think you said it right, the ultimate example of people taking advantage of having the power in a relationship, walking into your house, and Mike, you said it now, probably texting these guys 40 million times a day in the recruiting process. We'll take care of your son. We'll be in and now they're taking money on their own to steer them in directions that they know by definition are not the right direction to go, because you're steering them towards someone who is shady to begin with because they're involved in this in the first place. So wherever that falls on the criminal justice scale, and clearly it's fraud and the feds are coming after them, it goes very high, much higher than the other piece of this does to me on the despicable scale.
And it's funny because when you listen to, there's a quote that stuck out to me, because you're right, especially as it pertains to this, it's got all of the elements of that. But tell me what this sounds like to you in general, because this all goes back to the same place. This all goes back to a central theme we talk about in college sports all the time. And it was another quote from the FBI or the district attorney that came out with all of this. I'm forgetting his name right now.
The state's attorney, yeah.
The state's attorney that came out with was, but one of his quotes in addition, because he came ready with the quotes, by the way.
He had a writer.
For 10 charged men, the madness of college basketball went well beyond the big dance in March. Like, he's got a ghostwriter. Right. Congratulations. But here's the next line, and tell me what this sounds like. I'm going to remove the last part that makes it specific to this situation. Tell me what it sounds like. Month after month, the defendants exploited the hoop dreams of student athletes around the country, allegedly treating them as little more than opportunities to enrich themselves. What does that sound like? The NCAA. Because then you add the next words after that, through bribery and fraud schemes. And that makes it specific to this situation. But in an industry that's as flush with money now that creates problems like this, where you've got wealth disparities, certainly amongst the coaches, but you've got a group that's not making any money in all of this, so lining their pockets a little bit in this, because some of these assistant coaches were reportedly giving money to the players and all this to help kind of grease the wheel. And that little bit of money comparatively to a group that's not getting any of it in that circumstance is what creates the whole breeding on the whole disgusting petri dish where this can happen. But you remove those last little words about this situation, and it all just kind of sounds like the system we've been living in for a while.
So what's the answer to it? Because I try and say that, and your father yells and screams at me. So what is the answer to that? What is the solution to that? If indeed you sound like you agree with me that the amateurism model is broken, it isn't what it probably never was what they wanted it to be.
I agree with you. I mean, we don't butt heads on everything, but someone give me a solution.
So let's hear it. What's the solution?
The solution is
what keeps this from happening?
The solution is that the people in power have to decide that there needs to be a solution, because it's like anything else. The people that are on the bottom end of the shouldn't be asked to figure out the solution for themselves. It's the only thing that's going to change is if the NCAA and the people with the power decide, because we know if people with money and means and power want something done, when the NCAA wants something done, they get it done. And if they wanted to figure out something other than amateurism to make a lot of this stuff less of a problem and go away, and they wanted to figure out a system to play the players, guess how quick that would get done. The problem is it doesn't benefit them to get it done, so it's never going to get done.
Maybe the closest thing to an analogy I can think of is that for the longest time, and Mike Sr., you and I remember that for the longest time, we never sent professional athletes of any kind to the Olympics. They weren't, anyone who ever touched a penny from a sport went to the Olympics. And then all of a sudden we lost in basketball in 1988. And the next thing you know, Michael Jordan was there, and Magic Johnson was there, and Charles Barkley was there. We can't have this. So they changed that when they decided they wanted to change it. And that's okay. To me, it took a lot of the fun out of it, but that's neither here nor there for the purposes of this discussion. So I agree with you, Mikey, that if they wanted to, the first issue in this is they don't want to change it. They don't want to change it because it's working for everyone who stays in it, and the people for whom it is not working are transient. They come and go by definition in a 4 or 5 year span.
And while we disagree on some things, I have no problem if we can find some sort of solution to this. Now, you're talking about a solution to some corruptness in a business, in an organization. Well, pick a business and pick an organization.
Yes, there's always going to be some corruption.
Something.
But this is begging for it.
I know, but where we start to differ is when you want to open all doors and I say, no, I don't want to open all doors. There's got to be somewhere in between. So I'm certainly willing to listen to scenarios out there, but I haven't heard any yet where I'm going to say, okay, let's do this. But we know other people are absolutely going to line their pockets off the players. I get that.
Home isn't just a place. It's a feeling that you're safe to enjoy the things that matter most. ADT lets you take that feeling with you. Whether you're at home, your business, or online, we help keep you safe. With security systems, home automation, alarms, and surveillance, so you can feel at home wherever you are. Go to ADT.com to get that feeling for less than $1 a day. ADT. Home, safe home.
You're listening to Love Advice with Leanne. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Leanne. Longtime listener, first-time caller. Why, in your professional opinion, do you never take my calls off the air?
Is this Carl?
Yep, it's Carl. I mean, we had a few dates. Everything was great. I thought,
Well, when you switch to Geico, you could save a lot of money on car insurance.
Okay, awesome.
You should call them.
I will.
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
A really busy day. We're presented by Progressive Insurance. Our guests appear on the Shell Pennzoil Performance line. And I'm sure at some point yesterday you saw reports of the story of the federal government going after college basketball in a big way, in a way that could have significant reverberations around the sport. 4 college basketball assistant coaches facing federal corruption charges, and a Hall of Famer staring quite possibly at his professional mortality. That seems to be what we have going here right now.
Yeah, a couple of different things there, from the assistant coaches, money going to them to trying to steer players to certain areas, and we have the players getting some money to go to certain schools. I mean, there's a couple of different things going on here. You can decide for yourself what's more egregious in going on. I would imagine it would be the assistant coaches lining their own pockets and guiding players to where they want them to go, whether it's a financial system, an agent, tailors. That's amazing to tailors, to certain tailors.
Yeah, guys who make their suits.
These guys are getting money to do it, and this has been going on. Listen, it's been going on. It's been happening. And you can see, if you want to go down that road, you can see how you can make it happen. And they've gotten busted. So I guess you wonder, how deep is it going to go? Guys, when you get threatened with prison, all of a sudden you start talking a little more about, giving up some more names about what's going on. Does that make your sentence a little lighter if you're truly going to go to jail? How many more people are going to be, involved in this at the end of the day?
What will the impact be on the sport as we know it? Those are just a few of the questions. Jay Bilas will join us live in a second. Seth Greenberg is here on our set right now. And so let's start with this, Seth. Yesterday, all over Twitter, all I kept seeing from people was every college basketball coach in America right now is sweating, is panicking, is nervous. What are they nervous about?
I don't think every college coach in America is nervous, but I'm sure there are college coaches nervous because, look, what are the chances that they could have someone in their organization that's doing something they don't know? Now, look, some head coaches know everything that's going on. Let's not fool ourselves. But the job of an assistant coach is to recruit and get players. The job of an assistant coach is to keep things off the head coach's table. Mm-hmm. So, could there be things happening that they don't know about? There could be, not in every instance, but every head coach in America is having this meeting yesterday. There's no doubt in my mind. You've got your staff, you've got your compliance director, and you've got your athletic administrator sitting in a room. And that head coach is turning to his staff and saying, there's anything I need to know. All right, let me know right now. He's trying to get out ahead of it. Do we have an issue here? Have we done anything that we shouldn't have done? And look, in a lot of ways, he's trying to cover his own rear end. All right, because, with head coach accountability and clearing himself from the issue. But look, some head coaches will know what has transpired. Some head coaches won't, because some assistant coaches think it's their job. There's so much pressure on these coaches to get players. And in their minds, they feel like maybe they're not doing something. Look, it's been going on forever. That's just the way it is. The egregious issue is the assistant coaches that have taken money to deliver players to money managers and agents. To me, that breaks every single rule that I've ever grown up with as a coach. Because as a coach, there's a special bond you have with your players. As a coach, your job is to help that player get somewhere they can't get themselves. As a coach, you're trying to mentor them. You're not supposed to be pimping them. And to me, that is egregious. In terms of paying players, that's been going on forever. It used to be boosters and alumni and coaches.
Bag of money.
Now, because of the business of college basketball, all right, it's become a corporate issue with money managers, agents, and obviously in some instances, shoe companies.
Before we bring Jay in from a legal side of this, we can talk about the rogue assistant that feels he needs to do this to look good or to keep his job or whatever it is, and to where they keep it off the head coach's plate. But where is it? Go back to your head coaching days. Did you have the meetings with the assistants and say everything is above board? Did you actually, and do coaches actually have that conversation all the time that says, so if it's because it's my head gang that's going to roll for this thing, so we need nothing below the table going on?
Every head coach has to make a decision how you're going to conduct your business. And, like some coaches say, we're going right to the gray area, but we're not crossing the gray area. Because everyone goes to the gray area. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there's a gray area, and people are going to go to the gray area, but we're not crossing this line. We're not going to impact our credibility and who we are and what we stand for. So, yeah, it's a really, really difficult situation that we're in athletics. And let's also, the one thing I disagreed with as the charges were being presented, they're making the athletes sound like they're victims. Now, look, the victims are the guys that were sold to agents, sold to the money managers. But the victims aren't the people that are asking for extra benefits. Because, look, when you're talking about $100,000, that's not just some fictitious numbers where some guy wakes up and say, hey, by the way, Mike, I'm going to give you $100,000 if you come to our place. That's most times that prospect saying, you know what, I really like you guys, but, it's going to cost $100,000.
Kind of negotiated a little bit.
It is initiated. The extra benefit is being initiated most times by the prospect.
All right, and so it's that $100,000 that will, I'm going to use the word likely, certainly possibly cost a Hall of Famer his job. And that was what made me call Jay Bilas yesterday, because as this stuff was coming out, I was having trouble understanding that piece of it and why the federal government would be involved in that. And so Bilas, who is not only a magnificent college basketball analyst, but of course also a lawyer, was able to explain this. So Jay, good morning. We got Mike and Seth Greenberg here. Let's go to that piece of this. So if indeed it is true that a Louisville assistant coach is giving a $100,000, is arranging for Adidas to give $100,000 to a potential recruit for that player to come play at Louisville, I called you and I said, I understand that's against NCAA rules, but why is that a crime? Why is that something that the federal government is getting involved in? And you explained it extraordinarily well.
Well, it's a scheme to defraud, and it's a scheme to defraud a federally funded institution. So essentially, any institution that's getting more than $10,000 in federal funds, the federal authorities can govern this type of issue. And so the theory is, because the NCAA rules were broken, it put the institution in danger of economic harm. They're giving out scholarships on false pretenses. They have the chance to disgorge funds that they monies that they would earn in, from winning in tournaments. They could be hit with fines. Players could be ineligible, and therefore they'd have to vacate victories and give money back, things like that. And then the government is also alleging that it interfered with the school's ability to control its assets, and the assets meaning the players and their scholarships. So essentially the government's referring to the players as assets of the university, which clearly they are. So it's that sort of theory that you are putting the institution at economic risk for economic harm, and each one of these players and each one of these coaches has to sign a declaration annually that says that the players are eligible, that they don't know of any NCAA violations and the like. So they're signing false declarations and defrauding the institution. So most of the things that we're dealing with here in the normal course that really aren't any big deal. I mean, there's nothing wrong with shoe companies entering into agreements with schools and coaches and the like. And there's nothing wrong with giving advice to someone on, hey, this is a good money or this is a good place to go to school or things like that. It's the exchange of money here that's the big deal, and the fact that you could have economic harm. It's kind of like there's nothing wrong with the mortgage industry, but if you're a mortgage broker and you're taking bribes in mortgage loans, that's bank fraud, and there's economic harm that goes along with that. But one last thing. I mean, listen, there's a lot to unpack here, but there people have been throwing around, and myself included, like for these violations and these federal laws, it carries up to 20 years in prison. And I heard some people saying maybe as much as 80 years. That would be if these things were served consecutively. It's such a small matter relative to what the U.S. Attorney usually deals with. So we're not going to be seeing people sentenced to 20 years in prison. This could be, periods of months, if anything, down the line. This is an important matter, obviously, for college sports, but it is not the most important matter that the federal courts are dealing with. So we're not going to be seeing anyone sentenced to those kind of numbers in this.
Completely agree. Unless you're one of those guys that hears that number, then maybe you shake a little bit. But I agree with you. They're not going to serve that. The question is, Jay, how many more names will come out? Will these guys talk? How much more information? Do you see this as the start or the opening of something that's going to involve many more assistant coaches?
Yeah, it's the start because and I agree with you, Mike. Like if somebody dangled, said, "Hey, you're going to go to jail for 6 months," I'd be shaking.
Yeah,
that sounds like a long time. But relative to 20 years, I'm just relative to what these courts. Corruption and cartels and all that. They're not trying to blow the lid. Like I think you had mentioned, people have been steered to get suits made. That wasn't happening here, and the feds wouldn't get involved in that. They're not trying to blow the lid off the suit making industry. That's not an issue here. This goes beyond that. But is this going to get bigger? Yes, it is. I think you could see like some of the runners and the financial services guys could lead to some agents. And you wind up, going into agents' offices and seizing all their records, finding out some things. That's ultimately where this will lead. You're going to see people lose their jobs over this, and you're going to have a lot of people. The technical reach further than this. I don't know whether it reaches into football. Ultimately, if you wind up having to present a lot of different people, but the idea that this stops only at basketball would be kind of naive.
All right, Mike and Mike, Jay Bilas is with us. Let's put him on hold a second and try and see if we can get a little bit better phone line, because what he's saying is really important, and it's important that we hear it. Seth Greenberg, meanwhile, continues with us in our studio.
I just want to say really quick, I'm just reading the report, about the tailors. He said the bribes include choices of schools, shoe sponsors, agents, even tailors.
Yeah.
I mean, I just read that because it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
You got to wear a good suit when you walk across the stage and shake the commissioner's hand.
I think the point that he's making is if it was that
alone,
the feds wouldn't be involved in this. Right. Let me ask Seth, because there's a couple of things in the interest of time I want to make sure we get to here. The name Pitino comes up a lot over and over again in this. We'll get to him in a second. We also have some pretty high-profile programs whose assistant coaches have been named directly, namely Arizona, hugely high-profile coach in Sean Miller, USC, Oklahoma State, big-time programs. So if the assistants are involved in this sort of thing, if the Chuck Persons of the world are involved in this sort of thing, does that then hit the head coach? Does Bruce Pearl wind up in trouble because of that? Does Sean Miller wind up in trouble because of that?
It all depends on the situation. If it's paying a player, yes. If it's a player, an assistant coach getting paid to deliver a player, obviously that's not benefiting the institution, nor is he working on behalf of the head coach. He's working on behalf of himself. I don't think a head coach should be responsible or accountable for that. Now, there will be violations if there are players in their program, and there's a little bit of head coach responsibility there. I'm not sure if an assistant coach is getting paid to deliver a player, that would cause a coach to get fired. I think what causes a head coach to get fired is when players are being paid directly, because those assistant coaches are working for themselves, not for the institution, not for the head coach. They're working for their own benefit. Jay made an interesting point, though, because we're talking about basketball. In your sport, in basketball, you can identify the best of the best. You've been through a lot of AAU stuff when they're 15, 16, 17 years old. The whole one-and-done or two-and-done mentality is these money managers, these agents can say, you know what, I'm going to invest in Mike Golic, and I'm going to get a return on my investment in 7 months, 14 months. In football, the same thing I think is happening, but in football it's happening maybe at the end of a kid's sophomore year.
Of college.
They've identified, this guy's going to be special. And then that's when that process begins in the sport.
There's no
football.
doubt. I mean,
it's not just a basketball issue. This is a college athletics issue. This is a business issue. This is, if I'm a money manager, if I'm an agent, it's a very small investment in relation to the potential return on investment in a short period of time.
Seth, what happens to Rick Pitino?
If these allegations are verified, there's no way he can survive this. And it's as simple as this. They have a major investigation that they are appealing right now, where he's got 5 games that he's being suspended, potentially taking down a banner that's hanging in the Yum Center. While that investigation is going on, another assistant coach under his supervision is committing a major NCAA violation. The last time that happened, a major violation while you're being investigated, I think probably was SMU. They got shut down.
Yeah.
So, look, Rick Pitino's a guy I looked up to when I was a young coach. 5-star basketball camp. He was the guy that started it all for all of us, whether it's John Calipari, myself. I mean, there's hundreds of coaches that started in that camp that are coaching in college. But there's no way, in my gut feeling, that he can survive. There's no way he can survive this scandal a second time.
We want to ask Jay this, so just let me give everybody quickly a timeline of what Seth was talking about. June 11th, the sanctions came down on Louisville. During the summer, Louisville re-upped with Adidas for a new 10-year, $160 million extension. July 27th, so 6 weeks after that June 11th date, the FBI recorded a July meeting in which an assistant coach at Louisville was briefed on a plan by Adidas to funnel thousands of dollars to a potential high school recruit. And the assistant coach is caught on tape saying, we got to be very low-key about this. So, I mean, I don't think there's any way that Pitino can. And Pitino, again, is saying, I knew nothing.
Right.
As the other case, I knew nothing, but you can't live on that.
And that brings us back to Jay Bilas again, because, Jay, you and I talked about this yesterday. The idea of I didn't know this was going on doesn't work anymore because of a rule change, right, Jay? Explain that for our audience.
There are relatively new coach accountability rules where a head coach can no longer say, well, I didn't know. Whether it's reasonable or not for him or her to say that, they are imputed to know everything that's going on within their program with regard to the normal course of business. And, based on your last question with regard to the last scandal at Louisville, I looked at that as something that was so off the grid and so unimaginable that I believed that Rick Pitino didn't know anything about that. I don't think you can make the same claim with regard to recruiting. That is imaginable, and it does happen. And I think what we're looking at here is a complete cleaning of house of the Louisville athletic department. I think the athletic director loses his job. I think because it's really easy to find out exactly who that assistant coach was based upon their travel records. So Louisville knows exactly who that is. So I can't imagine that person is going to be employed beyond today. And now what they do with Rick Pitino, I do not know. but I agree with Seth that given the way college athletics works, I can't imagine him keeping his job after this, and especially after the last, when you've got two things back to back. That's just not the way college sports has tended to work. It would be an extraordinary happening if you saw Rick Pitino sort of remain in place given this. It's an extraordinarily difficult position for Louisville to be in right now because they've got a season starting. But I can't imagine him surviving.
All right, it's Jay Bilas with terrific insight into all this. Jay, thanks a million. Thank you for yesterday. Again, as soon as all this was going on, I saw a bunch of stuff that didn't make sense to me. And so I called Jay, and he gave me a lot of this explanation.
The thing that amazes me about Jay is all this was about money and everything yesterday is Jay charged us to have him on this morning. I didn't understand that.
Billable hours.
Shocking.
Mike and Mike presented by Progressive Insurance, creators of the Name Your Price tool. Choose from a range of coverage options and pick the price that works for you. This coaching accountability thing, Seth, I'm sorry, Mike, but that is fascinating to me because that is something we talk about all the time. And I wouldn't know. I not only didn't ever coach major college sports, I didn't play major college sports. Mike, you've been much closer to it than I have, but Seth, you've been there. You coached it. You know all these guys, and you know them all the way back. When a coach says, I didn't know about stuff, how much should we believe?
I think look, you think about, do you know everything your kids have done when they were growing up? They lived in your house.
No. Yeah.
All right? Do you
Not
know
100%.
everything your spouse does? No, you can't know everything. So is there a portion where the head coach doesn't know? Yeah, I'm sure there is. But there's also a portion where one head coach is responsible to know, and also that there are probably portions that the head coach does know, but he can use that. But I do think, and do I say it's right? No, it's not right. But I do think that an assistant coach at times really, I was an assistant coach longer than I was a head coach, really believes his job is to keep things off the head coach's desk, not put things on the head coach's desk. So, most assistant coaches feel like my job is to develop relationships, earn trust, recruit players. And the one thing I want to make really clear is that not every relationship an assistant coach has with a money manager, with an agent, or with a grassroots basketball coach is illicit. Because there are a lot of those relationships that are real because, every prospect has a circle of influence. And your job as a coach, a head coach or an assistant coach, whomever you are, is to touch everyone in that circle of influence. At worst, get them neutral. Hopefully get them working for you when you're not there. Because in the end, when a kid makes a decision, who's working for you when you're not there? Now, maybe in your situation, your family made those decisions with your children. But you know what? A lot of people, very successful people, have other people help their children make these decisions. So as an assistant coach or a head coach, you want to touch the people in the circle of influence. So they're working for you, or at least not working against you. So every money manager, every agent that is advising a prospect, every shoe company representative, every grassroots, look, there are some great grassroots programs that are doing unbelievably good things. So every one of those guys, let's not say every one of those guys is a bad guy. There are some people during the course of time that have, way back in the day when high school coaches were selling players to schools, way back in the day when high school coaches were asking for money if you wanted to come in and speak to their prospects. It's become bigger business. It's not mom and pop. It's corporate and money managers. There are a rogue of every walk in life. And there'll be rogue money managers. There'll be rogue agents. There'll be rogue coaches. That's just the way it is. So let's not paint everyone a villain, whether it's the players or these other entities.
Mike, a final thought.
Well, listen, I think you choose your path. These coaches chose new. Listen, everybody went in with his eyes wide open. There should be nobody that got indicted or whatever was charged yesterday that go, how did this happen? I didn't do anything wrong. They all knew. All the way down to a player and I agree with you, a number's not coming out of thin air. Players know that they can get money in some places, so they're going to ask for money in some places. And these assistant coaches knew exactly what they were doing, and they got nailed. My thought process is going to be, where does it go? Does it bleed over into football? Because you're right. There's no way it's just basketball. But I also agree with you. I think the majority of people are on the up and up. Okay? I do. But You find this out. Where does it go? What more names become involved? And the biggest name in this is Rick Pitino. You just wonder, does he get fired, or does he just say, you know what? I didn't know anything, but it's under my watch, so I'm going to resign. Is he going to do something like that? But I think his tenure is done. Other head coaches are going to be fired, and how many more names will we see?
Super quick, Seth, go.
I just think that this season, we're going to have a cloud over our season this year, because you're talking about the biggest programs, the best programs, the biggest names in our industry are being impacted. 3 of the top 7 teams in the country preseason are being impacted. Who else is going to be impacted? What players are going to be eligible? What coaches are going to be coaching those teams when the season begins? All those things are going to impact this season and the landscape of college basketball throughout the season.
The best of Mike and Mike.
Bring Damian Woody into the conversation here. And, of course, there's been so much talk about this around the NFL. D. Wood, let me start. What I want to ask you about this, and we're going to go on the field for sure here, is you've got some places, particularly in Carolina, where it feels like the players who may want to have the opportunity to express themselves in certain ways are not being given the ability to do so. Now, we know some players went to Jerry Richardson's house yesterday, who was the only NFL owner who was once a player himself, and they had a conversation, and the team said that conversation will remain private. But what would you imagine is going on in that locker room? We saw opportunities for players across the NFL this weekend in different ways to express their emotions based upon what has happened over the course of the last week and well beyond that. But in a place like Carolina, if the players truly aren't being given that opportunity, if they strongly want to, what would you imagine is going on in that locker room?
Well, I can imagine some guys are thinking to themselves, what is my worth here? Or do you look at me as a guy I'm just here for your entertainment? Or do you look at me as a guy who's not only a football player, but an active participant in the community, a person who wants to, as a society, trying to bring people together? Because for me, and again, different people have different viewpoints on this whole thing. But for me, I look at this whole thing as, how do we try to bring people together to create a more perfect union? Because this whole weekend I've been listening to all the discussions and everything, and the one word that really came back to me was patriotism. And there's many forms of patriotism to me, whether it's, you stand up and you're saluting the flag, or guys who are kneeling because they love the country so much that they want to, again, like I just said, create a more perfect union. So to hear the stories out of Carolina and seeing that their opportunity might be suppressed because of, the powers that be don't want that to affect maybe the bottom line business, I think it's unfortunate, because the issues that we're talking about, I think, supersede the game of football.
Do you think what the Cowboys did will, A, appease players who kneel during the anthem, and on the other side of it, appease those who want to boycott the NFL because players are kneeling during the anthem? But for those who may not know, the Cowboys all kneeled together before the national anthem. The flag was not out and the national anthem was not playing. Then they stood, walked back to the sideline. The flag came out, the national anthem played, and they all stood for it. So they knelt in their show of unity. They stood for the national anthem. Is that the recipe here? Do you think that appeases both sides?
I don't think so, because I think what we're seeing in our country now, especially when it comes to our politics, everyone has such a hard line, especially on this issue. I saw so many people just blowing up when you saw the Dallas Cowboys take a knee before the national anthem, and it's just like, well, wait a minute. If they're taking a knee before the national anthem, then what is your anger really about then? And then on the other side, people are like, well, if you're taking a knee before the national anthem, then you're really not.
What are you protesting?
What are you protesting?
It's not the spirit of the
original protest. It's not the spirit of the protest.
What it struck me as was that is a statement of response to the president.
Right. Yes.
Or the comments he made.
Right.
And the way he got very personal with players and their actions and the choice of words that he used. It isn't in any way in keeping with the spirit of the original protest started by Colin Kaepernick and followed by other players through the course of last season and the beginning of this season. So I don't have a real sense of where it goes from here. Now, D. Wood, you played in the league pretty recently. I assume you're talking to some guys who are still playing. Do you have a sense of whether this slows down to, I don't know what the right word is here, of how where it proceeds to from here?
I don't think it slows down, but I think the one overwhelming theme is the original message is getting watered down. Yep. It's getting watered down by these acts of, what we call acts of unity. Are you just holding hands for the optics of it, or are you linking arms and taking a kneel because you truly and honestly want to move the conversation forward? That's what's really been lacking in this whole ordeal. Is we've been stuck in neutral when it comes to this flag and not progressing forward. Remember, the whole point of protest is to shock the status quo. The status quo is just not good enough, and what's frustrating a lot of people is, okay, let's move to the real conversation so we can have real change.
And what is that move? That's it, because I see people on Twitter on both sides, some saying, what are these players doing outside of kneeling? Well, players are doing, there are some that are doing a lot.
Yeah, and I think that to me, and again, being a former player and speaking to a lot of guys around the league, is when you see people talk about, well, these, spoiled millionaire athletes and, just trying to down the guys. And it's like, listen, you guys have no idea the time, energy, money that these guys invest in their particular communities where they're playing for their respective team. It's just not fair for you to try to attack these guys because of how they're making a living and how much money they're making. It's just not fair in my opinion.
And one last thing I'll say, because I know we want to talk some football, is we have our views here. And while I had said I wouldn't kneel, I would be one of those that would understand my teammate who wanted to kneel and listen to the discussion about it, whether it's the Chris Long way of putting your hand on the shoulder of the guy kneeling. That's however it was. There would be a discussion because of a peaceful protest. And I hear a lot of news talk shows where they're just irate and so stuck on, I won't even listen to what you have to say because you're disrespecting our veterans, right? So they won't even get to the point of saying, wait, this is a peaceful protest, just listen to what they're saying. They won't get past that. And because they hear others like us on the radio say, well, I understand their protests, I wouldn't do that, but I'll listen to them. And then, so my point is, okay, don't care what I say, because yes, I didn't serve. While I have a father that was in the Marines and a father-in-law, I didn't serve. But I would have loved, as I'm listening to this one show, for the phone to ring and then pick up and take this caller and say, hey, hello, I'm the 97-year-old war veteran who you saw on Instagram taking a knee in response to what the players are doing, saying they have every right to do that and I support them. Now, what are these loudmouths that are telling the players just to get the hell out of the country if they don't want to be here? What do you say to that guy? Because while the majority, I still think, of veterans do look at it as some disrespect, there are plenty of veterans who have spoken up and have said, I understand what they're doing. And I would love those people to call into these radio shows where these people are so dead set on, get the hell out of our country, you spoiled millionaires. If one of those veterans called and said, hey, I think what they're doing is just fine. Let's actually listen to what they are saying. I just wonder what the response would be.
And I just got to make this one point. Protest isn't meant to be comfortable.
Right.
We as a nation haven't gotten to where we are today by being comfortable. We were put in very uncomfortable situations throughout the history of our country. That's what makes our country great. We're not North Korea. We are the United States of America, and because we have the freedoms to be able to do the things that you're seeing guys do on Sunday, that's what really makes our country great.
All right, Damian Woody is in our studio here talking football. Will Cain on the way. We'll go on the field now with a bunch of comparatively normal things, as I say, like Odell Beckham peeing in the end zone in what I think can fairly be described as a really distasteful way of celebrating a touchdown. In a fourth quarter in which a Giant team that had scored 13 points through its first 15 quarters this year almost came all the way back and beat the Eagles on Sunday, and Odell was really the only reason why. I mean, he's so brilliantly talented, and yet you have this stuff. D. Wood and the owner came out and said, he's unhappy about it, and he'll talk to him. What are we doing with Odell? If you're the Giants, if you're a teammate, what are we doing here?
Well, Mike, you know this. It's like a sliding scale of justice when it comes to talent, because the guy's so talented. You have to tolerate him, because if you take Odell out of that lineup, what are the New York Football Giants? They're a drastically different football team. Now, I'm not sitting here and saying that that I agree with the gesture they did, because for me, I look at it as this whole celebration repeal that Roger Goodell set forth this offseason or whenever it was. You've had all this time to really conjure up or think about different celebrations that you will be able to do once you score a touchdown, and the best thing you can think of is the old, lifting a leg, peeing on the hydrant type of action. I mean, bro, you got to be smarter than that. I thought you were more creative than that. Come on, man. Like, I need better. I want to see better. I'm kind of disappointed in some of these celebrations anyway.
And it's a 15-yard penalty.
But the bottom line is nothing's going to happen to him. I mean, to think that Mara is going to go down there and discipline him and say, I'm going to sit you, I doubt any of that's happening. They're going to maybe ask him in a little more fatherly, sternly voice to please not do that anymore, because the bottom line is you are costing your team 15 yards.
Right.
As my son said earlier, and I've agreed all along, the sideline antics, as I said, when he was headbutting the net, if you watched past him, players were just walking to the bench, not even turning their head at him, because they're used to those antics. To me, it doesn't affect them. When you take your helmet off in the end zone and it's 15 yards, when you pee like a dog and it's 15 yards, now you're costing your team. Now you got to have a little more of a conversation but if you're the 38th guy on the roster, it's a harsh conversation that may cost you some money or a job.
Right.
But with Odell Beckham, it's like, can we mute that a little bit, before we hand you all this money and you continue to be one of the best receivers in the league?
Mike and Mike presented by Progressive Insurance. Our guest on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line was a star born in Foxborough on Sunday. Yeah, Tom Brady stole the show and was spectacular and winds up throwing the game-winning touchdown. But how about the rookie quarterback he was facing on that day in that setting against that coach?
It was a tremendous performance, because I don't know if people really understand how hard it is to go up to Foxborough and win up there. I mean, there's a lot of veteran quarterbacks that can't go up there, let alone a rookie.
Never had.
It's never happened. But the performance he put up, he showed you everything in the toolbox. His legs, being able the escapability, because there were a couple of times where I thought he was going to get flattened out there, but it just shows you the tremendous talent that Deshaun Watson has to be able to escape and keep his eyes downfield. A lot of these rookies, they'll just, they'll move around and look to run, but the fact that he was running around but also had his eyes downfield, that's what you want to see out of any quarterback. But the fact that he's a rookie lets you know, wow, like, I don't know if the Patriots want to see this team later on down the year, because he's only going to get better.
We have the teams we all thought would be near the top. Is there a team or two that surprised you a little bit, that is putting themselves maybe into a little more of a conversation than we probably thought at the beginning of the year?
Ooh.
You buying into Jacksonville at all?
I think Jacksonville has a lot of talent. I jumped on Jacksonville's bandwagon last year.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I'm hesitant. But they have a lot of really good pieces on both sides of the football. I mean, I think the way they're trying to play the game, I think can take them a long way. That defense is able to get after people, and they have a sledgehammer at the running back position, Leonard Fournette, who's just going to just hammer away. Now, I don't know if Blake Bortles is going to be able to perform the way he performed this last game against the Baltimore Ravens, where he had 4 touchdowns. He looked like Joe Montana out there. But I think the formula and how they're building that team is conducive to winning a lot of football games.
Is there any part of you buying into the Bears, who the first week had 3 opportunities to beat the Atlanta Falcons, laid an egg the second week, and then beat Pittsburgh in overtime the third week?
I like the two-headed monster at the running back position.
Yeah.
I think those guys, Cohen and Howard, I think they're really, really good. I think the offensive line is coming together, and they got guys that can get after the passer. They got secondary that really held Big Ben down. It's early, Mike. I'm not jumping all in on the Bears as early, because a lot of these teams are like Jekyll and Hyde.
You're at least peeking in there.
I'm looking. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, from a distance. I'm like, I can fall for this girl right here from a distance.
I'll tell you, the team that I'm starting to buy into, but I want to see if they can do it in weather, is Detroit. I think the Lions, who are literally 6 inches from being 3-0 right now, they're better defensively than you realize. I like the Lions.
Well, the reason the Lions are better is because the Lions used to be built as an indoor team.
Right.
Now they're built as an all-weather team. They've, Bob Quinn, the general manager, has really come in and really focused on the line of scrimmage. That's how you win in this league.
I think they're going to win that division. Tell you right now, I think the Lions are going to win that division.
Hot take?
We will see. There's a hot take for you.
The best of Mike and Mike.
I like the look. I mean, you obviously, this is the look that, yours as well. You know I like these shirts. Golic has gone with these. What exactly is it's not a polo shirt exactly.
It's a polo. It's Under Armour polo.
But it's a little more. Oh, that's Under Armour.
It's a little stretchy.
It's very designer looking. It's very nice.
Golic, what are you on?
Hugs my sexy curves.
How many days into the jeans are you before they go to the wash? Are you on I wear them 4 times before they're washed, 3 times, 1 time?
You talking weeks?
You tell me.
Actually,
weeks, wears, however you measure.
Actually, these I just put on today. The other pair I had on, I wore for a little while, and then it's just your definition of a little while. Let me just say, they walked to the washing.
That's an eternal question, right?
Those jeans walked to the washing machine by themselves.
Then it's your definition of odiferous. Mike and Mike, I mentioned the GNC Lounge. You can mix it up with the GNC Buy 2, Get 1 Free Mix and Match sale. The best thermogenics, vitamins, fish oil, and more from Performix are all Buy 2, Get 1 Free. The sale ends today only at GNC. Okay, a lot of things I want to get into with you. Well, I want to start with this latest with the federal government getting involved in college basketball business. Jay Bilas said a variety of things with us this morning, and as I mentioned, I called him yesterday because I had a lot of questions on this. He's a lawyer, and you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
One of the questions that did come to my mind, we live in a world where college basketball is a really, really big deal. The federal government and these U.S. attorneys live in a world where we're talking about $100,000 payments. We're talking about, players getting, funneled to guys who are going to make them suits. These are awfully small issues in the big picture of stuff. Was there any sentiment out there that from people that you heard yesterday saying, maybe the FBI should have more important things to worry about right now than this?
No, I didn't hear that, but I did hear, what's the surprise? What's the big deal here? We've kind of understood this as part of not just college basketball, but college sports. So, I'd be curious to know how much traffic this story drives on, for example, ESPN.com. I'm not suggesting people aren't interested, but there is some level of, we knew.
Can't happen.
They're cheating. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that makes this something that people shouldn't be paying attention to, but to some extent it's something we kind of assumed was going on. By the way, regarding the prosecutors and whether or not they have something better, or the FBI and they have something better to do, just always remember, I think, that everybody involved in government at every level to some extent is a politician. And what you do to get advanced as a politician is do high-profile things. And if there's a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York or an FBI agent who wants to advance, one of the ways to do that is to get a high-profile takedown. And I would imagine Rick Pitino would check that box.
But that is true. But because to Greeny's point, I was kind of reading and listening to this yesterday and thought to myself as well, okay, take out FBI, insert NCAA. I could see it. Them doing an investigation into something. But I thought, what? When you're wiretapping hotel rooms, that means you didn't just start this investigation 3 days ago. It's been going on for a while. And I kind of thought the same thing. But your point makes sense. Let's get a big fish here, and that'll make us look good in going forward. But it did. I am with you, Greeny. It kind of seemed like, what are they doing?
So they're going to get one. In everyone's estimation, Rick Pitino is going to go down for this. Will, do you agree with that? In fact, our friend Pat Forty, who now writes for Yahoo, who was with our colleague for years at ESPN, suggested that if all of this is true and proven, that he believes Louisville basketball should get the death penalty, which to my knowledge has really only taken place once in sports history, and that was at SMU, which of course is in the backyard of where you grew up. Would you think this would rise to a level something like that?
In fact, I grew up rooting for SMU. I grew up with Mustangs, ponies, sweatshirts, and T-shirts just outside of Dallas. That ended abruptly in the 1980s. When you give a program a death penalty, fans move on. Look, one of the things that SMU fans have always said is, why us? Why not all these other programs that have done something similar to us? If Louisville doesn't get the death penalty, and this is far in the rearview mirror at this point, SMU fans will have a real, legitimate claim to, why just us?
I wonder. I don't think it'll happen here. I think it's going to take an awful lot to to your point, and SMU will keep saying, why us then, and why hasn't it been happening? Because I don't think that's going to happen to them. I think teams will get hammered out of this, but I don't think this is going to go as far as the death penalty.
I don't think so either. And then, Will, I had one more thing I wanted to do. There's another point you wanted to make there. One more thing I want to ask you, because you could just sit back. If you just parachuted in from another planet and didn't know anything about the way this stuff works, and you heard the following details. A perfectly reputable shoe company, Adidas, big, huge company, pays a young man, a basketball player, $100,000 to go play basketball at a particular school where they represent that particular brand of shoe, with an understanding that if he makes it to the NBA, he will wear their shoe going forward and all of that. He's going to go play basketball and go to school the same way that anyone else in his circumstance might. And he's going to have $100,000 for doing it, and has made this agreement with the shoe company that he's going to go play for them someday. Someone might stop and say, well, what the hell is wrong with that?
Everybody's on the same page.
Why would the NCAA have a problem with that? Why in the world would the federal government have a problem with that? So I understand, because I had to call Bilas about that, and he's the one who explained to me that what it's actually doing is it's defrauding the institution, that Louisville now becomes liable. They could lose all kinds of money and all kinds of other things only because it is against NCAA rules, and thus that violation could wind up causing them to vacate wins and all that kind of stuff. But it does bring up the question again, has the amateurism model as we currently know it in college sports outlived its usefulness when we see circumstances like this?
Here's the deal on this. If you say who's the victim in the entire scenario, you've got two people coming to a voluntary agreement, or two institutions coming to a voluntary agreement, and everybody's coming out of this for the better. Who's the victim here?
Right. Who's the aggrieved party?
The aggrieved party, Greeny, is the person who does not cheat. And now your rebuttal can be to me, everybody cheats. But it's the person that does not cheat and the fan. And the truth of the matter is, when I asked you, who's clicking on this story, how much traffic does this story get, I would guarantee you, I would make a large bet that the vast majority of people interested in this story are interested in, was my school cheating? More than that, is my school going to get busted? That's what everybody wants to know. Because if Louisville is cheating, if Louisville's cheating the system, yes, you can have an argument that taxpayers being defrauded because the taxpayers contributing money to the University of Louisville, and the University of Louisville is breaking rules. But what about, let's just say, for example, pick a random university. I don't want to do Kentucky for some reason. Let's say Tennessee. Tennessee isn't breaking the rules. Then the fans and the institution, the taxpayers of Tennessee, are being cheated by those in Louisville. Now, at some point, the Senate goes, but everybody's cheating, so there are no victims. But I don't know. I guess I'm not ready to believe that.
That's not my point.
Greeny's point is, don't have this rule. Just let a shoe company pay.
If it wasn't against the rule, no one would be harmed by it.
And I'm getting to that. So what I'm doing is pointing out there are victims. Yeah. Now, you're suggesting, well, the real culprit here is the amateurism rule. And I have issues with the amateurism rule, but not everything can be tied back to this issue. There are rules in every aspect of society. There are rules on Wall Street. There are rules on the streets with traffic laws. And just because you don't like the rule doesn't mean you should be able to break it, or that the rule necessarily should be gone. We could have other rules that people will cheat. There's always going to be incentives to get around the rules, no matter if it's college basketball, college football, or Wall Street. I'm not sure getting rid of amateurism is going to say, you know what, if we do that, then the coaches will all be on the up and up and on the same page as far as getting players in the door.
Yeah, listen, I agree. This is where you and I would disagree at the Pandora box. So if you let that happen, but you say, hey, you shoe companies, you have to cap it at $100,000. But you can give $100,000 to 4 different players. Well, then someone's going to try and give it to a 5th player. Or someone's going to try and the kid might say, oh, I want more than $100,000. Well, okay, I'll give you $150,000. To Will's point, they're always going to try and beat the system somehow, some way, because you can't just open it up fully and have no rules. So you want to expand the rules. That's open for talk, but then that's just going to be the first thing everybody does is read the new rules. Now, how can we get around them? That's kind of what a lot of people do.
I mean, that doesn't happen in other, like what you're describing would be something similar, if I'm understanding it, to like the salary cap in a professional sport. And there are checks and balances in place that make sure that they don't violate the salary cap. You can't be everybody's 49ers and just sign another guy.
Sure you can. That's where a bag of money comes into play. I mean, you can't just.
No, my point is, but if you established for a salary cap in college basketball, for the sake of discussion, which I wouldn't be in favor of anyway, but if you did that, you could have a system system of checks and balances that, in theory, is making sure that you don't exceed that level. And there aren't that many kids out there that these programs are going to be giving $100,000 to. What number is it total?
Then you know what? The one kid that isn't going to get $100,000, he may get 50, or the one kid they may have to give him an extra 25. Listen, hey fellas, I got 3 different places offering me $100,000. Someone's got to step up a little more.
You know what that's called? It's called capitalism. It's called America.
It's called finding a loophole to your rule out there.
Deregulate Wall Street, take away those rules, deregulate kickbacks and bribes and all that, because there's always people willing to do that.
Always going to happen.
Those are rules that make sense because there were obviously aggrieved parties on the other side of those. There is no, in my opinion, I fail to find a victim in Adidas giving $100,000 to an 18-year-old kid. I don't see who's being harmed by that.
The victim is the schools that can't afford to have that done.
Well, the schools now, I think we've even gone away from that because it's Adidas that's doing it, right? I mean, it's not, in this case, it's not even the $100 handshake is what it used to be. Back in your day when you were saying people were offering you money,
right.
It wasn't, the shoe companies that were offering you money.
That's very true.
It's actually a legitimate business agreement that we're entering into.
I think I share a lot of your sentiments on whether or not amateurism is a farce and whether or not people should be able to be compensated for their unique skills in this world, but I'm just not willing to reverse engineer it from the people going, you know what, there's rules being broken, so therefore the rules make no sense.
Yeah. I agree with you on that, and I do not in any way, I've never in any way said, if you don't like the rules, go ahead and break them.
No, you want to change the rules.
But I think that if you don't like the rules, you should talk about changing them. Mike and Mike presented by Progressive Insurance. Our guests on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Will Cain is here. Will, we've talked a lot about Odell Beckham Jr. this morning. What are your thoughts?
First of all, these are my thoughts. I just love that there are several, well, there's at least 2 athletes now that are operating on such a higher intellectual plane, perhaps even like such a higher existential plane than the rest of us little small-minded morons running around out here in the world. And Odell Beckham and Kyrie Irving have clearly reached sort of that nirvana stage of existence where they're doing things that we just don't get. Odell tweets yesterday, actually a CNN reporter tweets that, you know what? When Odell was doing that dog peeing thing, when he's doing that, I think it could be, was that maybe a protest against Trump and his SOB comment? To which Odell replies, you're onto something. You know what? You're smarter than you think, than you look. Impressed with you getting that. Kyrie, by the same hand, says, that whole flat earth thing I was doing? I was just trolling you, see what you guys would do for like a year. Just trolling you, media, public, just to see if you'd take the bait. At some point, can we look at this and go, oh, hey, Odell, hey, Kyrie, why don't you just call us morons and get it over with? We're supposed to believe that's what you were doing, Odell, when you lifted your leg? That was a super subtle rebuttal to Trump? Yeah, okay, I got it, Odell.
I think the new one to try and figure out is the NBA player Michael Beasley.
Yeah.
Did you see his little rant or thought process that we only use 10% of our brains? Who was the person who figured that out? He must have been using 11% of his brain. And then he went into about a 3-minute piece on why that had to happen, even though he was rebuked by that and couldn't understand how he would be rebuked. It was fascinating. It was a fascinating 5 minutes that I really wish I had back now.
The difference is I think Michael Beasley might actually believe that. Odell doesn't.
Oh, Beasley absolutely believes that. No, it was hilarious to listen to. But, John Mara is furious at Odell for doing that. But what do you think he can really do or will do?
Well, he can. Can he fine him?
They could theoretically suspend him, but I think we all agree they will not.
No, they're not going to do that.
And they didn't. Look, Tom Coughlin and the NFL suspended him after the Josh Norman game for what was a blatantly dirty, cheap, and dangerous hit. But Tom Coughlin never took him off the field in that game, and the very honest answer he gave afterwards was, I'm trying to win a football game.
Yep.
The Giants this season is hanging by a thread at this point at 0-3. You're not even going to consider taking him off the field, nor would anyone expect you to for a dog peeing celebration.
I'm sorry, that was a Trump protest.
But at some point, yes, for his very subtle peeing on the president. Anyway, one way or another, the whole thing struck me as ridiculous. Okay, with regard to that,
yes.
I think it's important that everyone's voice is heard here, and a lot. Mike and I, for the most part, when it comes to the protests that have gone on around the National Football League for over a year now, and particularly this past weekend, we are largely like-minded on this subject. And I think it's important that people who do not agree with our point of view have a voice here and are able to voice it. And I think you come from a different place. So what was your take on everything that happened here?
Well, My overarching take is this. It's possible to believe two things at the same time. In fact, I do. Look at this from the president and the protest. I can believe that what the president did is beneath the office of the presidency. That, number one, you shouldn't be calling private citizens out there SOBs, and you shouldn't be using the bully pulpit to influence the employment decisions and the employment practices of private businesses out there. I was in politics before I was in sports. I criticized then President Obama on that exact issue at one time, using the bully pulpit to chill speech. Now, I'm not drawing moral equivalencies. I'm telling you that regardless of the party, regardless of the who's holding the office, I will always stand on the side of free speech. Don't use it to chill free speech. That means I don't like what the president did. I also do not like kneeling before the American flag during the national anthem. I do find it disrespectful. To some extent, I believe it is meant to be disrespectful. When I listened, and I do listen, to Colin Kaepernick say, I will not stand for a country, I cannot take pride in a country that oppresses people of color, African Americans, I hear exactly what he's saying. Now, he has a message, and he has a purpose, and one I'm willing to talk about on the merits. By the way, on the exact specifics you talked about earlier, which, by the way, I don't think, Greeny, are obvious. I think it does take real attention to know what he's talking about. I interviewed Mike Leach on Ryan Russillo's show yesterday. Mike Leach said it's hard to know what the protests are about, it's to some extent. And that's not obtuseness. That's not him trying willfully to not know. It's because what's happened is the protest gets turned into buzzwords like inequality and racial injustice. And nobody is against those concepts. The question is, how prevalent are they in police tactics, in law enforcement, in specifically the killing of unarmed black men across the country? To what extent is race playing a role? And if you think there's not a debate to be had on that, you aren't paying attention to that issue. So I can take an offense to both the president and the protest. And I would just add one thing on this little mini rant. And I listen to you guys. I often do. I listen to Damian Woody. I'm going to be debating Damian on First Take today. The fact of the matter is this. You can't get further down the road of free speech absolutism than me. But this is not a First Amendment issue. It simply is not. The First Amendment is there to protect you from government censorship, not employment censorship.
Right.
You don't expect your UPS driver to give you his latest speech on DACA when he drops off your package. You don't go to the checkout counter of your favorite grocery store and have somebody expect to wear a Make America Great Again hat. It's because the employer says what you can and cannot bring to his employment. And the truth of the matter is the NFL, Jerry Richardson, Jerry Jones can say what he wants his employees' political opinions to be exhibited on his stage whenever he wants, and my prediction is that will happen sooner or later. The NFL will pass down a rule that says no more of this.
Mike, go ahead.
I don't think the NFL will. I don't think after having then I think you'll get even more guys.
The NBA has the rule.
No, I know they do. They have the rule, but they didn't go. NFL has gone down this road now with plenty of guys kneeling, and now you want to talk about really losing sight of the initial protest. That's what would happen as well. Now, if the NFL all of a sudden, okay, all you guys that are doing your thing, you're not allowed to do it anymore. I don't think there's any way the NFL comes down with that rule. I don't think they want to go down that road. I get what you're saying about free speech at work. I get it, but some places are, like the NFL, are letting you do it. So is it wrong for you to do it then? Is it wrong for you to take advantage of the fact? I get what you're saying about your UPS driver, but the NFL players feel, right or wrong, they feel, because I hear a lot of people say, do it on your day off. Get in front of a microphone and do it then. Well, the big audience is 65,000 people in a stadium, and then the millions of people that are watching as well. Now you've done a silent, peaceful protest to a multitude of people to help get your message out instead of the UPS guy saying it to Jane or John Doe when he's delivering his box.
You have a big audience right now. There's a microphone right there.
Yeah.
Do you feel free? Do you feel appropriate to give your political opinion on every single issue right now?
No, I don't. But it's been allowed in the NFL, and I'm sure they're not the only business. I'm sure there are others that would allow it or have allowed it.
You're right. It has been allowed. That doesn't mean, number one, that it's right or that the NFL feels like it should continue. And when I see Alejandro Villanueva's jersey spike in sales, when I see a Buffalo Stadium worker who's been there for 30 years quit on the spot, when I see DirecTV giving refunds to people who are upset about the anthem or the protests during the anthem, when I see these things, what I have said on First Take, and I'll tell you guys there today, living in the Northeast, in a media bubble. I think we are underestimating the level of resentment towards the form of the protest going on in this country. And it will. I think it will impact the NFL's business. And at that point, Golic, the NFL is going to have this rule I'm predicting is will come. It's going to come either at the hands of business cratering, or it won't come at all.
We all know it will become because of money. And what I'll say about Alejandro and his jersey sale, what happened to Kaepernick's jersey sale when he knelt?
You're absolutely right.
It went up. What happened August 1st of this year, his jersey was 39th out of 50, the only person in the top 50 that wasn't in the league. So it's on both sides. What happened to the ratings Monday night? The ratings were one of the highest they've been in a while, not just for the pregame, for the entire
But to be
game.
fair, that's compared year over year, and last year's was against a presidential debate.
And it's the Cowboys who always get a good rating.
True.
Listen, the point of the jerseys is a simple one. A lot of people feel very strongly in one direction, and a lot of people feel very strongly in the other. And it doesn't take that much to shift the number of the jersey sales thing. It's not as though every single day people are buying millions and millions of these jerseys. So a small shift like that will make that sort of an initial difference. Look, this is a really good topic, and I'm glad that you voiced that. I don't see eye to eye with you, but it is important, I think, that those issues are that we have the freedom to be able to voice them here on this show.
The bottom line, though, to your point, is the bottom line. If this costs the NFL, starts costing them a lot of money, they'll make a rule. You're absolutely right about that. That is the great equalizer in everything.
But then the problem, look, so you start, it's like, what is the thing of a butterfly flaps its wings, then, a thunderstorm starts somewhere, because now I believe you will start getting massive boycotts from people who feel on the opposite side of that. And so they're in a very difficult spot if it does come to that.
Can I just say this one last thing? Obviously, I have some disagreement, as you just pointed out, with you. I have some disagreement with Damian Woody, Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman, whoever it may be. And I just think one of the things that I think a lot of fans, and for that matter, I feel, is that, we've said before, we wish sports could be free from politics. I wish that Alejandro Villanueva and Colin Kaepernick's jerseys weren't markers for where we are in society and where they're being sold. And the reason for that is this. We need it in society. We need politics-free zones. We need places where we don't have to bring our divisive issues to every aspect of life. We need it not just to be mentally healthy as a society. We need it to, in fact, advance those causes. Because if they're everywhere, then we can't advance forward with it. We're always going to put up our dukes and get forward, get at each other. And the thing is, when I disagree with you, I believe that's respect. I believe engagement and individuality, how we treat each other as individuals, that's what's respect. Not agreeing with you, not nodding along, not suggesting that every single protest I think is, appropriate or fair. And I think that's where we need to get. Discuss, engage, disagree, and treat each other as individuals, not break things down into simplicities of racist, or are you for equality, or are you pro-American, or are you unpatriotic? It's all symbols, monikers, and dumbing down, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere.